This is the Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. This is episode 42 with Brad Smith. How you doing, Brad?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, man, it's so good to see you. Two bros getting to talk.
Yeah,
We
you
haven't seen you for
too.
a while.
Yeah, man, it's been a while. I love how we'll spend time apart and then we'll hop on the phone or see each other in person and drop in pretty quick. And so this one's a little bit different with the tech involved, but I'm excited to have some conversations, especially given the weather outside. It's a little gray over here, so feels nice to be cozy and be sipping on some tea.
Nice, man. How you feeling?
I feel really, really good. It's been I'm in the process of a lot of big transitions right now. So there's just a lot going on, and I find myself really impressed. Normally transitions aren't the easiest thing for me. And I've been really impressed with myself and how I've been able to stay grounded and just focus on, okay, what's next? Pop up, look the big vision, make sure it's still aligned, and then ground back into, taking one step forward. So I'm feeling really good. I'm really excited for this.
Very nice. Yeah, I hope we can unpack that a little bit more in the conversation today, and we'll have plenty of time. So, and there's no mess ups. So I just put this out in its raw form for all the listeners, and I think that they really appreciate that. So, yeah. So the first question I always ask everybody is the same question, and the Conversations with the Mind is the name of the podcast, and I just want to know how that kind of lands with you, how that phrase unfolds in your own mind, and what Conversations with the Mind means to you.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing that comes to mind is the psyche, and just how complex that is. And then the next thing that came up for me is, okay, so are we just talking about the mind here, or are we talking about the heart and, some of these more, I guess, maybe not deeper, because the mind can be that way as well, but, can we bring in the emotional state as well, and more of the soul? But ultimately it's funny because there's a lot of conversations happening all the time within our own mind, between others and whatnot. So the conversations are endless. It's rare for me to really get that silence in a prolonged form.
I like how you bring in the aspects of the heart, and the felt senses, the spirit as well. And I think when people hear the term mind in general, most people go straight to thinking about the brain and cognition and things like that. But, if we took like and I'll be talking about this in the intro to this podcast too, but I've thought of this term recently called conscious centrism. So I know you've heard of ethnocentrism, things like that, taking a perspective based on your own experience. Well, conscious centrism, I think we as human beings feel that the only consciousness that should exist or that does exist is the one that we experience. And I think that we discount a lot of the consciousness or the minds of other things like plants and animals and all matter, really. And I love how you bring in that consciousness is more than just the mind. It's also this heart and this spiritual connection as well. Do you mind talking about that piece a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I'm doing more work in the field of what's been dubbed the death industry. So supporting people in their dying process, and then also using that framework to support people our age in how to live more fully. And in that framework, it talks about the emotions, the mind, the body, the spirit, and then the practical. And I think that's a really fun way of organizing, the whole of our experience here, because there really is so much more intelligence both within one individual, say myself. There's my mind, there's my heart, my spirit, my gut, my body, but then also the intelligences across species as well. And I think oftentimes it's so easy for humans to be human-centric and think that our intelligence is the way it is. But when we look at other animals, such as dolphins or elephants, and simply the way they communicate, it blows everything we know about that out of the water. And so I think it's really important to think about, what is intelligence and the importance we experience, and same with consciousness. Um, and we'll probably dive into it. I'd love to in these conversations, but my own experience has been that our consciousness can be constantly expanding, which is just such a beautiful, oftentimes challenging, but such a beautiful process, uh, until we finally get to the point. I'm sure there's a lot beyond that, of really the only thing I know at this point is that I don't know much at all.
Mhm.
And
Totally.
that makes the whole thing just this wonderful experience of curiosity, and really brings that joy of wonder back into the process.
Wow, man, that was so eloquent and beautifully put. Um,
Thanks, man.
no, I mean,
Starting off strong.
yeah, I resonate so much with like every single word you just said. Yeah, really beautiful. And it's beautiful that you're doing that death doula work. I've always been fascinated, being a Buddhist myself, I've always been fascinated with the dying process, and in Buddhist
Totally.
philosophy, like afterlife, and the bardo and reincarnation and karma and all these
Hmm.
things. And I've read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying from cover to cover, and
Hmm.
gotten some of the mantras tattooed on my body and things, and
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
the whole philosophy behind the death process as it's taken from different cultures, I think, is fascinating. I think Egyptian is another super
Hmm.
fascinating death culture, and I know very little, but that's amazing. I guess in your own education to be a death doula, you probably had to study these rituals in a number of different cultures across time.
Well, it's funny. Yeah. There was a lot less of that than I anticipated. However, um, maybe similar to you, my interest in death began with psychedelics back in college, and then B, there was a point where I went and studied abroad in Tanzania, and then went to Nepal, with a friend, to actually go on pilgrimage with him as he processed his friend's death, which happened in Nepal. And so that was my first introduction to Tibetan Buddhism, um, and that's when I just really became, I wouldn't say enamored, but it really resonated with me. I still don't quite know what it is, but then it was just this process of how do we work with and get to know death to live more fully.
Mhm.
And so since then, I've studied different cultures, lived with different cultures. It was actually, I had a funny experience years ago. I was living in India, and it was in the city of Varanasi, which is Shiva's city. It's where many, many people go to die, because it's believed that if you die in that city, in Shiva's city, and you play your cards right with ritual, that you won't be put back into the cycle of reincarnation. And so I was at one of the burning ghats, where all the bodies are paraded to um, be burned at the funeral pyres. And my grandma was dying at that point. And I was sitting there processing. Uh, I didn't know at that time, but she actually died when I was there witnessing these different bodies burning. And I was processing her death, and witnessing these bodies burn, and what happens after that, and contemplating the soul and consciousness and all these things. And that's when it really struck. I was reading also a book by Ram Dass, um, called Paths to God.
Mhm.
And it was, being in that city, witnessing these bodies burning, my own grandmother dying, that it just really planted this seed of, I want to work closer to this energy, and I want to support people in working with this energy, both as individuals dying in a near term, but then also, Buddhism, some practices or lineages say every single day meditate on your death, and that's truly the impermanence of this lifetime, or at least part of it, this human experience. And so yeah, that's really close to home for me. And then, like I said, venturing out into other cultures and stories, not just in Asia, but in my own Western lineages, coming from Europe, here in the Americas with Native American traditions, and then also more of the shamanic approach, which found, I think, I hesitate with that word given it comes from Russia and Siberia,
Mhm.
but more of the Central and South American practices coming from the indigenous people down there. And there's really just so much to learn. And as Westerners, we have there's a big gap to close, I believe, in working with death. And again, not to be dark or pessimistic, but
Mhm.
really using it as a mirror to look back on our own life and figure out, what am I doing well and what do I want to change so that when I'm in that place, I can let go and I can be free and be free not only then, but the entire process leading up to.
Yeah, man. Wow, there's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah, we can unpack a
Yeah,
lot,
there's a lot there. I think, yeah, I had a different journey through, gaining an interest in death. And I think, early on, my interest, well, I was born on Halloween. So
Uh-huh.
that's,
Hey, that's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, so right away, like I was obsessed with like horror movies and things like that growing
Uh-huh.
up. Just like, hey, this is a part of my identity, so I'm going to lean into it a little bit. And
Yeah.
I was it's at certain points in my elementary, middle school, I was a little bit of a masochist, like showing off for friends and stapling my hand and things like that, like testing the
Uh-huh.
boundaries of physical pain and physical limits,
Mhm.
and really kind of having uh, definitely a fear of death back then, but an interest in it. And I think a couple near death experiences in my
Mhm.
addictions, as well as, in high school and college, being in rollover vehicle accidents and like how the hell did I walk away with that without a scratch? Like, um, and psychedelic experiences also kind of giving me a glimpse into the possibility that there could be something on the other side. Kept that interest going a little bit. And I think it was probably through um, getting into Buddhism and specifically Tibetan Buddhism and reading that Tibetan Book of the Dead that I really opened up to the idea of really unpacking what death is. And like you said, the whole process leading up to, during, and after,
Mhm.
not just the event that's guaranteed to happen for all of us.
Mhm.
And I felt like, through Tibetan Buddhism, I started meditating specifically on death. And when I tell that to people, I always get a funky look, like they think I'm being a sadist or something. Like,
Totally.
you meditate on death, bro? And yeah, I do. But I love how the Buddhists approach this. And I have a couple mala beads that are made out of like yak bones from Nepal,
Mhm.
and specifically, you're supposed to use mala beads made out of bone, and meditating with that mala, and then intentionally going into a mindset of exploring what death is. The philosophy in Buddhism is that you come out of that meditation with a much greater appreciation for the life that you're living. And like you said, like
Mhm.
the time that you have left and really taking full advantage of it rather than, being lazy and things like that. So meditating on death has been extremely beneficial for me as a person.
Mhm.
And then also as a warrior, I guess, a modern day warrior, I sort of, I love how the samurai talk about death as well. That, if you go into battle every time already having accepted your death, then
Mhm.
you'll be the most fearless warrior on the battlefield because
Mhm.
nothing will make you afraid. And I've always kind of tried to embrace that in my own martial arts and my everyday warriorship that I try and embody.
Certainly.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful. I love hearing that warriorship uh, piece, especially because it's an important time to be fearless and to be a warrior and a warrior for light, a warrior for love, and a warrior that is the last resort is drawing the sword.
mhm.
That peaceful warrior mentality. Um, and yeah, I feel like that's a whole nother conversation we can dive into, especially nowadays with where the masculine is at, and how do we bring that back into the right relationship and support the feminine and that warriorship quality while it exists in both those energies so strongly. I feel like it's especially twisted right now in the masculine, and so bringing that back into the right relationship. Um,
So how do you do that?
And
Because I talk about that on the last few podcasts. Is like that's something I'm personally trying to work on. Is like my hard, sharp edges, my masculine, my intellectual side have served me very well up to this point. But now I realize that I'm not whole unless I embrace and foster and value the feminine to bring it into more of a harmony and a balance. That's when I'm really going to reach my true potentials. So that's what I'm working
mhm.
on. I'm interested to hear how you would go about doing that.
Oh man, such a work in progress. I mean, after this conversation, I'll be running over to a men's group that I finally started up, and that's the central piece of exploration there. I mean, there's a couple things going on. One is support, um, authentic support. Another is authentic exploration of what is the masculine. I'm actually leading something on that tonight. Um, and it's a lot of questions. We'll see what kind of, you know, what arises in that. But for me, um, it's that balance part. And one thing that stuck with me, it was shared that we can imagine, because it's hard with language, because it's so easy to get stuck and put things in boxes, especially in the world nowadays. We want to be politically correct and this and that, and so really taking a step back and acknowledging that we're not talking male or female, we're talking masculine, feminine, we're talking energies that every individual holds, and there's a spectrum there, and balance looks different for every body. um, and for me personally, what resonates is, relating to the natural world. And so I was told once that, imagine a canyon with a creek or a river at the bottom, and the masculine is that canyon wall. It's strong, it's sturdy. The feminine is the river that runs through it. Um, it's much more fluid, it's softer, and the river requires the canyon walls to hold it, to give it some kind of container. And the masculine requires the river to make something beautiful out of it. Otherwise, you would just have a giant delta of water, or you'd have a giant plateau of land. However, how beautiful are canyons when you drop
Mhm.
in? I mean, they're endlessly mysterious. Every time you turn a corner, it's something new. Um, and I just love that, because one requires the other to make something truly beautiful. And it also begins to point at, has the masculine be vulnerable and strong enough to be willing to be carved away by the feminine,
Mm.
to be made into something more than just a block of rock or a block of something solid. And then again, how does the feminine have that courage to be carving away at something, and to be supple enough to move around rocks, to always be shifting to what that new situation is. And again, like, I hold both these energies inside of myself. I believe that we all do. It's about coming into right relationship with that. And so, your original question was, what is that,
Mhm.
and how do I practice it?
Yeah.
Um, and for me lately, it's been this balance of, how do I maintain an open heart? How do I be honest and transparent and willing to be uncomfortable? But then also, how do I set boundaries? How do I tell somebody, you know what, enough is enough and you can't come any closer, or this is as much as I'm willing to give? Because it's so easy for me as a person to give myself away. And so something I've been working on is, how do I be a little bit more, not sharp in a negative way, but sharp as in clear.
Mm.
A, first with myself, and then B, with other. And then I think relationships are paramount to development, for me at least. And so being in relationship with other, whether it's another man or another woman, for me, my primary relationship is with women. And so being in relationship with my girlfriend is, I'm constantly being challenged on what is right relationship, and when do I give in, or when do I hold my ground, and how do I be kind and loving and compassionate all the way through.
Mm.
So again, I think it's a constant, it's a constant trial and error, and remembering and forgetting. And I think that's one of the things that we're here to do, is help bring that energy back in the right relationship. And it's going to take a lifetime or more to do that. So constant work in progress. But I think that being willing to talk about it is huge as well. Um, how do we talk about it? I guess another piece that's come up for me in recent years is, yeah, I can be big, I can be bold. And after living in India, actually, I started to be quiet and not open my mouth as much and not be as pointed. Um, and especially with women, not wanting to uh, quiet anybody in the room, because I think that those voices are so important, especially now. And I think that I can mar myself in that process of quieting myself when maybe I do need to speak up. So we don't want to, in my opinion, it's not about silencing or belittling the masculine. It's about bringing it into right relationship. I think all things in life for me, it's never about the what, it's about the how. So all things, whether we're talking about work, exercise, drugs, medicines, whatever it is, it's not what we're doing. How are we doing it? How are we engaging with it? And again, that's going to look different for everybody. Only we know the right answer. But I love that Rumi quote of there's a field, something along the lines of like there's a place, there's a field, and in this place, there's no right or wrong doing. I'll meet you there. And I love that. I just butchered it. Rumi says it much, much cleaner and better. But it really just takes away of right and wrong and more of what's right relationship, more of the writing of a wheel. How do we make sure the wheel is round and functions, as opposed to this is right and that's wrong, because that inspires judgment. And I'm really trying to step away from that.
Nice. I like how you speak very highly of the relationship between all things, and and also you said everybody's journey is a little bit different with bringing it back into balance. And as you're telling me how you're trying to express it, I'm like, man, mine's like the exact opposite process right now. Because
tell me about that.
Yeah, I tend to be. I don't give very much of myself. Like you said, you give a lot of yourself, right? And you need to know like when not to. For me, it's like I don't give enough. I don't show people enough of what I'm feeling. I don't show people enough of what's really going on inside of me. I kind of have developed this stoicism, and through being a therapist, and they train you to like keep your face straight. Don't show any micro expressions when someone tells you something traumatic or whatever. You're not supposed to have a reaction, is how they tell us in our formal training. And so I developed like this stoicism almost to a fault, where people don't know what's going on inside of my head. People don't know how I'm feeling. And I hate that. Like I want to let people in, but a part of me, that masculine, has been keeping people at a distance because of trauma in the past. For me, it was mostly around abandonment with my mom and my dad never being around. So having that part of abandonment, and just like, I don't know if I can let you in. And, my wife, like you said, relationship is super important. And my wife has been the biggest blessing for me, to be able to be that mirror or that reflective surface for me to work on myself and really push myself to be more vulnerable, to let people in. So my therapist says, we relate everything back to Jiu-Jitsu, because that's like how my brain works, is Jiu-Jitsu. So she's like, you need to let Callie into your match. Like, so that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I try to, I check myself and I say, have you let Callie in on your match today and how your match is going? And so that's kind of one of the tools that I'm using to try and be more expressive. But it's hard, it's hard, especially for men, having grown up in this culture, in this society, being told like suppress your emotion and don't share any of that stuff, and don't ever show you're crying. And that's what I was raised as, that's what culture told me to be like. And it's fun to get in there and try and like reprogram it the way I want it now. But it's difficult not having a guide or a mentor to show me how to open myself up I've always had masculine role models showing me how to be masculine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I need to ask some of the feminine energies of some of the feminine plant medicines to help me with that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and dude, it's such a work in progress. Like, I mean, we have very different upbringings, and there's so many commonalities in that. Like, uh, crying for me, for example, has been like, it is still so darn hard to do, to get there, to let go. And breath work is actually one of the first things that really opened me up.
Mhm.
I'd be breathing for 45 minutes and would have just the worst tetany in my hands
Mhm.
and so much pain. And then I realized, like, oh my God, if I cry, it goes away. So I'd
Right.
just
Yeah,
be
you
in this
just gotta
room,
let
like
go.
sobbing, like almost forcing
Mhm.
myself to cry. Um, and uh, and then it would start releasing. And I went through, my partner of 8 years, her and I split up in June. And what's that? Is that a
That's my
pup?
dog. That's my dog.
Hey, pup. uh, Her and I split up last June, and it's truly been one of the most challenging processes, if not the most challenging process of my life. And enduring too. It's so interesting how that plays into time. But even in that, um, working with grief, it can be so challenging to process or to let go of. And I do think crying. There's a book by a guy named Martin Prachtel, and I forget. It's something like uh, raindrops on dry earth, and it's of grief and praise. And the premise of it is that grief is the highest form of praise. Grief
Mhm.
is mourning, um, or yeah, grief is mourning love's loss.
Mhm.
um, and that in the spiritual tradition that he teaches, grief is such a prerequisite for the dying process. We're back on the death thing, and that it actually provides the fuel for the lost person's soul to get through um, this sea of the cosmos and onto the other side where the ancestors await. And he goes into the individual implications and the cultural implications, societal implications of not grieving. Um, and It's a trip. It's definitely worth reading. But I think crying, everybody grieves differently, but crying is definitely a common trend with many people.
What
And
do
I
you
think with a lot of men, being able to let go into that process is so challenging. I noticed for me.
What do you think about pre-grief, if that makes sense? Like grieving somebody's death before they're dead, knowing that they're on their way out.
Yeah.
And I only ask you this because of my biggest lesson, growth from grief. Any grief process in my life has come from grieving my own mother's death, and
Mm.
she's still alive. Um,
Mm.
but there's points in her life where she's, I come from a family of addicts and alcoholics and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
she's been in points of her life where it's like any day I could get a phone call from the hospital that, there's been an overdose, or,
Mm-hmm.
someone found her passed out, or something like that, dead. And, you I felt that for many, many years, just it could happen today, it could happen today, it could happen today.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a place where I was like, I cannot keep torturing myself with this potentiality of her passing away and leaving. So
Mm-hmm.
I need to get over this. And so I
Mm-hmm.
grieved her death through meditation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I went through all the stages in the Western psychology says, I went through all the bargaining and anger and
Yep.
acceptance,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I grieved her death before she died. And I feel like since that happened, um, I have had much less of an attachment to this idea of losing her,
Mm-hmm.
and a much greater appreciation for the time that I do get with her while I
Mm-hmm.
have it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't squash my hope. I still have hope that things can turn around,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it I don't know. What do you think about pre grief?
Yeah, man. I'll share two parts. One is witnessing that in a dear soul sister and current boss of mine. And then the other has been a personal experience. And so my boss, God bless her, and she's such a dear friend as well. I guess I'll lead with a dear friend, because a boss, that's a secondary piece. But her mother came down with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's-esque disease about a year and a half or 2 years ago. Her mother passed about 10 days ago. And I was talking with Susie, and how are you doing? And she's like, I'm a little bit numb, I'm exhausted, and I'm relieved. And one of the reasons I'm relieved is because I've been processing my mother's death the past 6 months. She's been in the hospital and this and that, and now it's happened. But I feel like I lost my mother months ago when she lost her mind, and she didn't know who I was, and this sort of thing. And I think that's completely valid. I think that's okay and healthy, depending on the situation. And I have some understanding into that, because before my ex-partner and I split up, a year before that, we'd been, I love this woman so dearly. And leading up to, her and I had a very harmonious relationship, but it started coming up in various journeys and things of that sort, that this relationship was not what I envisioned it to be. And I envisioned, a family and a house and kids, and it took me time to get there, but ultimately that ended up kind of playing into it, whether it was because of cultural layers or anything else. But through these various medicine experiences and then personal experiences, dreams, I began to accept, and it really culminated on a night that we might talk about, which is when we sat in ceremony. But basically I was shown that, that you need to walk away from this relationship as it is now. And her and I had a conversation, and I think I basically grieved a lot of the relationship right then and there, that this is not going to last in the way that I thought it was. Long story short, her and I ended up continuing our relationship for another year. We ended up opening it up and kind of deleting any prior contracts we had written about it. And that was in a prayer of, okay, I understand I've gotten the pulse, I need to let go, but maybe there's still hope that things can go on. And then about a year later, about a year later, it came in again. We had an incredible year together hanging out. Yeah.
You see him in the corner?
Cool.
Sorry. No, I'm still listening. My co-host is peeking in through the frame.
Oh, groovy. But long story short, a year later kind of came around and was like, okay, I do need to leave this relationship in like a more definite way. And again, God bless her and this relationship as well, but she was devastated, and so was I, but we processed it very differently. I felt like I had been processing that grief for years leading up to this moment, whereas for her, it just all happened at once. It was very sudden. And a year later, we're both still processing our lives and that event. And for me, it's been much more interesting. At first I felt like I did all the processing, and I think I even told her that at one point. And I was very wrong, because it comes in these waves, and it comes in these layers of depth that keep on going. But I think pre-grieving is very normal, and even healthy to some extent. It helps us let go of the outcome of a situation and simply be with what is, which is your mom is alive, and the fact of the matter is that she can die. And you're coming into peace with that, or have come into peace with that. And I hope now that it opens you up to be an even deeper relationship with your mother, and to enjoy the moments that you have. That's how it was for me. The last year of Kaylee and I's relationship was, it was beautiful. It was, it was absolutely beautiful.
That's been my experience, that ever since I grieved that with her, my relationship with her has been so much stronger. Especially I feel from my end, like I feel like I've opened up a lot more, and and really tried to connect with her on a soul level
Mm.
since that event. Um, yeah, really, that's really powerful.
Yeah, I know that was a long-winded thing, but
No, that's great.
um, yeah, personal personal experiences are complex.
But I'd like to, yeah, I mean, since you brought it up, I'd like to get into, talking to you a little bit about what happened that night in that experience, for my own personal benefit. And I
Oh,
hope
that
that,
fateful night.
yeah, and I hope that the listeners, well, I know the listeners are going to get something out of it. We all get something out of everyone's experience.
Yeah.
So should I first? I'm going to start first by sharing my experience as an observer of what
Mm,
happened, and then
mhm,
if you wouldn't mind going into what was. I'm super fascinated and interested in what was going on in your psyche that night, because you're the only
mhm.
one who could be in there. And so maybe I'll start first. So this
Yeah,
was a shared ayahuasca circle and great medicine that night. I think we were working with a shaman from Brazil.
yeah,
Um,
Fane, he's of the Huni Queen people
yeah,
in Acre, Brazil.
he was amazing. He's been one of my favorite healers to work with, and so really good medicine. And we're all having a dandy time in the DMT Tryptamine Palace. And then I think I'm laying there still, and I hear you across the room starting to wail. At first it sounds almost like dolphin sounds, and then start wailing, being very verbal about what's going on with you. And but you're still, I could tell you're still, your energy was still in the mix with the rest of us there, because we were all kind of dancing and laughing with each other and all the noises going on, and you were still engaged with that. But you were also dealing with what it seemed like a psychic crisis in the moment. And
Hmm.
so then I hear a little bit of flailing going on, and
Mm,
I'm trying to stay in my experience at the same time. And then eventually I look up to make sure that things are okay, and I see other people around you, like making sure that you're not knocking things over with your arms and legs. And I think at one point people had you held down, but you were very cheery at various points, and then you'd kind of switch into a different mindset and be almost face to face with Mara, in that
mm,
the Buddhist
mhm,
perception of all your fears and everything. And then then you'd flip right back into really joyous and laughter. And so yeah, that was my experience from that. And the next day you definitely looked like you had gone through hell and back, and come out like you were all smiles the next day, and you're like, wow, what was that? And giving everybody
mhm.
hugs, and it was amazing to see that. But I never I'm just fascinated. What was going on for you in that experience? It must have been.
Man, I mean, I am still unpacking that night, and I think I will be for the rest of my life. Um, it's actually funny. One thing I've never told you is that that weekend we had met at an event prior, and then prior to those ceremonies, all these ceremonies were much more tight knit, and this was the first ceremony that you know you and I had a conversation. Okay, yeah, like come on in. And I had this fear, talk about mirrors and projections. I was like, I hope this guy doesn't freak out or something.
For me.
uh yeah, totally. I was like, I don't know this guy, I hope he doesn't freak out or something. And then long and behold, I'm that dude. And it's always so humorous after the fact. We put projections onto people, and that's just us trying to make sense of our own internal process. And so I've never told you that, but I just think it's a riot, because I remember in those moments coming to, and then afterwards, just how much of a rock you were. So wanting to voice that gratitude and just the humor in this big cosmic mirroring game that we're in. Yeah, so that night, I mean, that night to me felt like the culmination of a couple of years of work. And we talk about death. I don't view death at the end. I view it, if we have a circle that starts here, it goes all the way around and it ends here. So that death, that birth and death, that's one portal. Um, and So I view those things as really the same thing if we zoom out far enough, or if we rip around that circle enough times. Um, and so that night was the culmination of a chapter and the beginning of a new one as
Mm.
well. And it was really interesting that so for a couple of years beforehand, I've been doing my work, and I kept getting this place of, um, what's beyond this life, like what's beyond this dimension. And I'd been in other spaces and whatnot, but there kept being this place that, like, okay, if you want to go past here, like, you got to give it all up. And I
Surrender.
remember I was in a surrender, yeah, fully. And I remember I was, in other ceremonies, and I kept having this uh, kind of archetypal dream process of, like, okay, I'm on top of this pyramid, and there's all these deities, and Horus, Isis, Mayan, Greek, but they're all around me, and my head's like on a chopping block, and they're like, all right, if you want to be initiated, go meet
Mm.
whatever this is next, like, you got to give it all up. I remember, like, being like head on a chopping block in this dream state, and like, all right, like, I'm ready, like, super masculine, like take my life, I'm ready, like, please.
Mhm.
And could never get past that. I remember a couple of times I'd call Bonnet over and be like, hey, I need you to help me die, please.
Mm.
And you go into some song I could never quite let go, because I'd want to push through, and something in my unconscious was just like, hell no.
Mm.
um, and so that actually happened the previous night that we sat in ceremony. And um, I didn't move past it and was okay with that. And so this night, I go up to get medicine, and my intention, I don't know if you remember, was to serve the group. Um, and I did that in a way that I had no idea was possible. But I go up and get medicine from Bonnet, and he pours me a full glass, and I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And then I give it back to him, and go to sit down. He's like, no, no, wait, like, will you take another? And I was like, oh man, yeah, sure. I trust you. I trust this. Yeah, sure. So I go sit down, and man, I think there's 30 people in that room that night. We didn't get halfway around. I was sitting, people were still being served medicine. I'm just like, oh my God, like, this is going to be interesting. And instead of this really big masculine force of, like, this top of the pyramid and give your life, the medicine just came in this beautiful, soft pattern. Um, and it was just like, all right, get ready.
Mm.
And then literally all hell in heaven broke loose,
So did you
before I knew
surrender?
it.
Did you surrender in that moment that it said like here we go? Because you mentioned before, like there was a hesitancy before to push that veil or to relax into it. Was that
Yeah,
fear based? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is much softer approach. I'm more comfortable letting go with this.
I think that was part of it. Totally. And that's I gave into the feminine, and the feminine to me is like, the death is feminine.
Mm.
It's a letting go. And I I know people are going to disagree with this, and that's totally groovy. But in my experience, I've had several near death experiences. Some were through medicine work, others were, falling off of a cliff in Nepal, or when I was younger, falling off. It seems to be cliffs and plant medicine, actually. So I
Hey,
wonder what there is to that.
maybe that you need to be careful doing this, but maybe go source some of that Himalayan
The bee
honey.
honey.
Yeah, the bee honey. But be careful, like double ropes.
Yeah, dude, totally. Or I'll wait on the bottom saying prayers, and then
Yeah.
say thank you and take it from there. Um, but where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so the death part, and letting go, and yeah, it was like, wow, this is soft, and okay, yeah, I can do this, I guess. Um, and a lot of interesting phenomena happened that night. So we'll see what there's time for. One, I'll just note, there was this interesting part with mirroring, and I've experienced this in other ceremonies, where the person directly across the room from me was paralleling me in some way.
Mm.
Um, and so, like, pretty quickly, maybe 30 minutes in, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to crap my pants. I need to go to the bathroom. Um, go to the bathroom. Nothing. It's just all bodily sensations. There's nothing actually happening. And then before I know it, I'm on my knees and just kind of popping in and out of consciousness. Um, and to save some of the details, I end up back in my place. And the whole process for me was really, I mean, it was the most challenging process of my life up until that point. And that's because I had to give it all up with no promise of coming back. And I was able to do that when I was younger, especially with medicine experiences. But since being in this relationship and job, and these things build up in our lives, and then we don't want to let go. And so there's a lot learned that night. I guess alluding to a lot of, I mean, I was shown things. I witnessed a lot of truth that night, and it was funny. The medicine before I sunk into this said something like, what I'm about to show you, you cannot speak.
Mm.
And I don't remember all of that night. And I think part of it's because I know I talk about it. And so I'm slowly remembering more and more as I'm willing to not talk. And some of these things, like, they just can't be spoken about because there's no language to describe it. But basically, I had to work through my entire, I mean, I lived many, many lives that night, and I died many, many times. And for me, the process was this wave of, you heard it verbally, but language is something that I love, and it's a power. My throat is a power place for me. And it felt to me like I was using my language to grasp onto this dimension, this reality. So I'd come back and I'd be like wide-eyed and talking like, ooh, da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden my language would, I'd say the word now or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd get stuck on that. And I'd be like, now,
I remember you looping. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'd be looping, but then I'd be like pulled out of this reality and into another one. And my language would oscillate faster and faster until it would stop. And then I would just be silent, I think. Or I'd be speaking in tongues, or who knows what was going on. But I was not in my body at that point. I was in another place, ranging from, the void to, it was very, I mean, Buddhism is a great parallel and analog for a lot of these processes, because, we move through our own stuff, our karma, we come and make amends with that. Then we move through the wheel of life an infinite number of times. And man, I mean, that night I was man, woman, child, beggar, priest, murderer. I was Jesus for a while, getting hung on the cross, like in front of all y'all. And there was just so much energy moving through me. And it felt like I was just processing all of humanity. And I mean, one of the things prior to that, and I've been doing work with people for a number of years, is I had this experience probably 4 years ago where I was working with a friend, and something either was transferred or was unearthed from my own process. And I became to be more concerned with working with other people. I became afraid of their energy and getting stuck within my system. And that night, one of the biggest lessons, like the universe, it felt like, was just like, oh yeah, you're afraid of energy. Like, it was like Hape, like, like, we're just going to run it all through you and show you that it's fine. And honestly, since then, things feel much less sticky. I'm not afraid to work with, really, I mean, I'm not going to say that because then who knows what's going to come my way, but I've been able to gracefully work with everybody that comes into my path. And it felt like I got to experience everything and nothing at the same time. And since then, leading up to that, I was always like, what's on the other side? Like, what's heaven? What's God?
Mm-hmm.
And now I just accept the great mystery as that. It is a great mystery, and there's no knowing to be done, because knowing implies that something is static, that it's fixed, and everything's always in movement. And so the moment that we can know something, it's moved to some degree. We can understand things, but knowing, for me, is just, it's out of the question, because nothing is fixed.
Wow, I've never heard that expressed that way, but that makes so much sense. I mean, when you think about some of the, the particle experiments,
Uh-huh.
and how you can't observe or measure atoms or matter or particles I mean, unless you observe it. Like when you're not observing it, it's just random. It's all over the place. It's chaotic.
Uh-huh.
But the moment that you look at it with a measurement or a tool or your eyeball, like it becomes static in that moment, and then you can measure it. But that makes a lot of sense when you apply it to knowing and knowing oneself and knowing your own consciousness and knowing, why are we here, and all these big existential
Mm-hmm.
questions that we hopefully are asking ourselves, like
Mm-hmm.
just letting go and being like, well, I'm probably never gonna know,
Yeah.
and then what do we do with it? We just sit and soak into it. I'm hoping,
Mm-hmm.
if could you explain to the audience real quick what rape is, as well as what that the eye drops that we did that night were.
Sananga, yeah. Yeah, so rapé, it translates to snuff in Portuguese. But it's used by many, many different tribes in Brazil, other countries as well, but generally in the Amazonia region. And it's a powder made from different plants, a combination of dried plants as well as the ashes of different plants. There's many, many different varieties. But in short, it's a medicine that supports us in centering ourselves and healing ourselves and cleansing ourselves. Some are meant to cleanse the liver and gallbladder. That's what we use before the last ceremony. Others are meant to, clear the head or the thought. I mean, for me, they all do that to some extent, but different plants will target different areas of the body. And basically, it's used to quiet the mind, to find center, and to get us to where we need to go. The fun part, or really uncomfortable part, is that it's blown up your nose by another, or you blow it up your own nose. So it's applied nasally. It's applied nasally via air. And oftentimes tobacco is often in it as that carrying agent, that spirit agent. And it's cool. This is a whole nother tangent, but I was recently taught that tobacco can be applied in different ways relating to the elements. And so hape is the air element of that, with it being applied via air up our nose, as opposed to drinking it, which would be water, or chewing it, which would be earth, or the strongest or most potent prayer is fire, or smoking it. So that's what hape is. It's a plant medicine. And then sananga is a root. Sananga is the plant, and then you use the root. They basically crush it and get this liquid that comes out of it. And that liquid is applied as an eye drop. And similarly, it's said to cleanse your system and open up your third eye. So people will use it before hunting to clear, the energetic body, bring in luck, but then also to sharpen their vision and their intuition before hunting. It's also used before ceremony. And that night, I mean, there's always hape being used. That night we used sananga, and we also did that face painting with the urukum. And so that has its own quality of medicine. I've heard different things from different people. A friend, teacher of mine, she was like, "Oh yeah, man, you were painted up with red, like spirits. Target was on your face, man. Like, of course you had that happen." But I mean, I've sat in many ceremonies with urukum, and that didn't happen. So I don't fully buy into that, but red is a strong color. That's fire, that's passion, that's the belly. And so when we work with that medicine, we're definitely stating something to spirit.
Yeah, I purchased some rape at the last ceremony we were at, but I still don't have an applicator.
Yeah, we got to get you an applicator, man. I'll mail you one up.
Yeah, so on your travels coming up, if I can, spot me like $40 or however much it costs, and bring me a real cool one from your travels. That'd be awesome,
dude. Definitely, I look forward to it.
So I got to ask you, and I wanted to have you on this podcast because this whole thing is about consciousness and about bringing different fractalized individual minds and consciousness together, hoping that the sum is going to be greater than our individual parts, and hoping to add to the Akashic record of of
Mm,
experience. And so people can
mm,
hear from our experiences and learn something that can benefit them. And I wanted to have you on because of your fascination with the mind, just like mine. And I'm
yep.
curious to know, how did you get started in your interest for the mind? Did it
Yeah.
start with psychedelics or did it start prior to that?
Yeah. Well, real quick, I want to wrap up that
Yeah, yeah,
conversation earlier about that difficult, challenging process.
yeah,
And I suppose just to tie a little bow on top of it for now, at least, is that, that was one of the most challenging experiences of my life and one of the most fruitful. And I think it's so important that when we go into these processes, that we have a deep understanding as much as we're able of what we're getting into, karmically, energetically, physically, all these things. And that was a big process for the group too. And for me, it was a big thing of like the medicine was telling me, okay, you're organizing these events now. You're not leading them. Don A is, of course, but you're bringing people into this world. I want to show you how challenging and how deep it can be, and how is that process going to go for you? How's it going to go for me as an individual? So actually, after that, I stopped working with that medicine, any medicine, for almost a year, and have only started in the past 6, 8 months getting back into it. But it was a really sobering call of, um, this is where one can be taken. And so you need to know that to be responsible bringing people in, and then also to be able to support people if they're ever in that process, to have a deeper understanding of where one can go. And again, like, a part of me is almost, I would be okay if I never did that again,
yeah.
went through that process. And a part of me is like, I've made a lot of changes in my life since then, so that if that ever came up, I wouldn't be latching on to things, because that ultimately is what creates the suffering, is that holding on to. Or, I think in these higher states, the mind has no idea how to process any of this. So the moment that the mind comes in, it's suffering and it's challenging. The heart, these other centers of our bodies, other intelligences, these other, centers of consciousness, they are able to process this information that the mind can't even handle. And so much of it has been, okay, great, I've lost my mind, and now I'm really stepping into my heart. And now, how do I really build a bridge between those two and be able to consciously choose when do I want to engage each of those and get them on the same team? Um, I had, I love the idea that, you it's not about cutting through the ego or diminishing or destroying the ego. It's about building relationship with the ego. It's about engaging the ego in a way that works for us to accomplish our missions, our karmas that we're here on this earth to do. Um, and so it's much more about harmony than like, just cut off the injured part and we'll move forward. Um, so
Yeah,
just want to
man.
wrap up the challenging conversation part.
Sure.
And
Well,
now, yeah,
before we get to that question, I because I don't know if I've told you this about that night, but that night changed my life forever.
mm,
It was an amazing experience for myself as well. Everything from being transported into a little um, atom or a molecule within a plant, and shown the entire life cycle
yeah,
of a plant.
uh-huh,
That was amazing. And being able to witness the consciousness that plants do have, and how they're
mm,
communicating with us in every moment. But we're,
mm-hmm,
again, conscious centric and not open enough to other forms of intelligence and other forms of communication
mm,
um, that plants are communicating to us in every moment. So I saw that. And then the relationship piece, I kind of zoomed into my body.
hello,
Oh, yeah. Hey.
hello.
Yeah, there you go. I zoomed into my body at times and got to witness kind of like if I was like just like a piece of muscle fiber looking into my chest cavity. I saw all these different little systems, my heart system, my lung system, my blood circulatory system, and all of them were separate societies, almost
Mm,
separate communities of cells working towards, their specific aim. But then what I got to see is the relationship that each culture, each society had with the system next to it, and
Totally.
how my whole body couldn't function if the systems didn't communicate in a harmonious, symbiotic
Hmm.
way to bring balance. You know, if one got authoritarian, like the rest of my system would shut down. And so I got to see
Totally.
that too. But
Totally.
the groundbreaking part that happened for me is I went in there, and I'd been dating my girlfriend for a couple of years at this point, and again, unable to be vulnerable and let go and figure out what the relationship meant to me. And so grandmother ayahuasca showed me two very distinct routes that my life could take. Um, and it showed me this future of myself, having achieved all my dreams and all my aspirations, all my educational and career goals, but living in wealth up in the mountains on my dream estate, but being alone and being completely miserable,
Mm-hmm.
and just not wanting this life. And then it showed me another fork, a possible future, where if my girlfriend was in my life, I would still achieve my dreams and aspirations. They would look different. You know,
Hmm.
my estate maybe not so big because I'm supporting a bunch of kids or something, but I found that this version of myself was much happier, much more fulfilled in life, much much truer to what I felt was necessary for me in this life. And so grandmother ayahuasca said, these are your two possible futures. If you
Mm-hmm.
continue being your stoic, non-vulnerable self, you're going to end up alone.
Mm-hmm.
But if you break down and show this woman just how much she cares, or how much you care for her, this could be your possible future. And after that experience, I drove straight home, and I got on
Yeah.
one knee and I proposed to my wife right there. I was so dirty,
Ouch.
and I was like all sweaty and everything. And I know, I've heard many, many times, don't make any huge decisions
Yeah,
right after
totally.
these experiences. But I felt it like this was the most pure message I'd ever received. Like, this is what you have to do. And so I got down on one knee, and she was enthralled, and it's been nothing but good times for she and I since then. So
Beautiful.
that experience has very strong significance in my
Yeah,
life
man,
as well.
beautiful. Well, I wish, and my prayer for you is that you can achieve that, and achieve that softness and that vulnerability and that joy and that happiness. And and that's the fire. You know, everything around us that comes and goes. The material, the money, the home, the wall. Uh, but that joy, that fire, like, that's it, man. I'm so happy to hear that that you're feeling that, and that,
Mhm.
you know, you're with this woman that you love so much, and that she challenges you to be soft, uh, and vulnerable and loving and expressive. Because it's all, for me, it's always the both and,
Mhm.
always the both and.
Yeah. So
Cool.
so so how did you get into being interested in your own mind? I feel like there's a lot of people out there that don't even pay their mind or their consciousness a second glance throughout the day.
Mm,
It's just go to work, come home, day in and day out. But for you and I, like, this is like our bread and butter. This is what we're thinking about in every
oh
moment of every
yeah,
day. So how did you get interested in this?
yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I remember, like, in high school, I wasn't super engaged. And you know, that created rifts in its own right. But I remember I took I took psychology, and I was like, this is awesome. And then I took sociology. I was like, this is also awesome. Then I took AP Psych. It was the only AP class I took in high school, and I was just like, still, this is amazing. Like, people, it's endless. We are so fascinating to me. Um, And then in college, I was going to take psychology, and then I actually had this block come up, and it was like, I'm afraid that I won't be able to leave work at work, and that I'll always be taking everybody's stuff home with me. And I don't want to do that to my family or any future relationships I might have, whether it's friend or partner or whatever. And so then I actually ended up studying environmental sciences and studies and doing that whole systems approach. But meanwhile, like, in college, I was always fascinated with um, what else is there? And I ate mushrooms for the first time when I was 18, I think. It was just like, whoa. And thank God I did it in a relatively good setting. When I went on a hike, was in nature, and then went out to a beach. And, that relationship for me, for many, many years, it was always, what's next? What's more? What's beyond where I just was? That got me in some sticky situations every once in a while. But throughout that, I'm just endlessly fascinated by people. And I think that can be put into a couple categories. Like I think people are wildly interesting, and I always want to understand them so I can relate to them and understand. Yeah, I think connecting is really important to me. But then the other part is like, oh my goodness, imagine if like half the world was doing what they absolutely love and like what was aligned with them. Like, it'd be a wild, magical place. So how do we support people in waking up? And for me, my own process of healing has been heavily supported by plant medicines. I mean, other medicines as well, synthesized, but lately really plants. And they've healed so much in my relationship to others and myself, my brother, my family, friends, but they've really opened me up to spirit. And I think spirit is something that, I consider air to be really strong spirit in so many languages. Chi, for example, breath, it also means spirit and energy. It's like the invisible that connects us. And I think that that's what I'm really interested in bringing back into my life and our society and culture is spirit, because I think we've really lost touch with it. So it kind of moved from psychology to spirituality, and now it's just all one big mess of like a joyous discovery of the human experience.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your experience and your knowledge around shamanism, because I studied shamanism in my undergrad. I took an advanced course in that, and we mostly, like you said before, we mostly studied Russian, like those types of countries where it came from. I didn't study too much with South America, but that's where you feel your focus has gone. And how do you feel like your understanding of shamanism has like informed your own process and exploration of your mind space?
Yeah. Well, first I have to name that the word shaman
Right.
or shamanism, I've got like a little bit of not. I think it's been, is cultural appropriation the right word? But the word comes from a medicine man or woman in, I think, it's Siberian culture. And so, and there's definitely plant medicine involved with that. I consider, when I talk about medicine person, I really consider everything to be a medicine if we use it in that way. So a medicine person can be working with plant medicines such as Amanita mushrooms, which is very shamanic. It's those mushrooms come from Russia and that area, like the flying reindeer kind of thing. And then that was used by anthropologists to describe medicine people all over the world. And so where a medicine man or woman in maybe Siberia would be called a shaman. In the Huni Queen tradition, it's called the page. Or maybe even in, this is getting more like priesthood, but like in Vedic tradition, maybe it's a Brahmin priest, but it's a person of spirit who has studied to work with the natural environment to heal and support others in their process. And I think it's something that's completely intrinsic to all of that is, somebody's spirit is strong, their body is oftentimes strong. When their spirit is weak, we start seeing dis-ease or ailments manifesting in the body. But working with medicine people of sorts, I mean, it's been incredible to witness. For me, again, like, it's how these people operate it just feels so darn good. Like I remember coming out of a peyote ceremony, and like, put through the ringer that night, and all night, what was I giving to the sacred fire, to grandfather? This is before I really knew really what was going on, what I was doing, but I was giving like the tail ends of like what I was smoking, whether it was tobacco or some kind of herbal blends, to the fire. And then the next day I see myself, other individuals, what do they give to the fire? They give the first bite of the food they're consuming, the fire, an offering to the fire. And so I think what I've learned most is how to live in a clean way, how to live in right relationship with my surroundings, with myself, how to be aware of what I carry, how to be conscious of what it is I'm doing and not doing. But yeah, that to me is what shamanism or the medicine path has brought into my life. I mean, one more part that I think a lot of people associate with shamanism is the ability for individuals to leave their body and to traverse this interdimensional landscape, and to support people in navigating that and being able to come home consciously. One of the things I think got lost in that night was like, I was lost and I didn't feel like I could be retrieved. And so I was struggling with that. And I've had the opportunity of working with other folks, and they just have these interesting stories of people's hearts even stopping, and then them going in and bringing them back. So I think that ability to navigate these unseen worlds is another, different Zoom trait. But I really enjoy using the language of medicine path, medicine men, medicine women, because I think so much of, I think when we speak, that's when first we begin to manifest and create. And that's how we relate with each other as well. And so picking language that resonates with me is important.
Yeah, I think.
Did they answer your question? I kind of went on a couple tangents.
No, you did. And I think it brought up two of my favorite sort of explanations or depictions of what medicine men, medicine women could be. One is that and I'm just going to continue to call him shaman.
Yeah, go for it.
So that the shaman is actually a sort of spiritual surgeon, in that they can either imbibe the medicine themselves in conjunction with their patient, or not imbibe it while their patient is imbibing it, or the other way around, that the shaman imbibes it and the patient does not, but that they are able to see your more subtle energetic levels and see what's blocking you, and see through your physical self, to be able to like pinpoint as a spiritual surgeon, and kind of like direct your spirit to that point that you have to work on. The other one I've heard of that I really like is sort of a controversial thing to speak about, but how mental illness shows up in these tribal settings. And often it's the people who by any Western standard, we would call them mentally ill or schizophrenic or something like that, that these are the people that become the medicine men, the healers of the tribe, and they're venerated. They're lifted up as being special people to be able to heal others. Whereas in our society, we see those people with mental illness or challenging behaviors, and we we lock them away in jails, we put them in therapy, and we ostracize them, we put them down rather than lifting them up like these other cultures do. What do you think about those two?
Yeah, man, I think that's beautiful. Describing it as that. I mean, in my experience, like Bane, for example, he considered himself a page or a shaman because he hasn't gone through the initiations or rites of passage to do that. So he considers himself more of a space holder for the medicine to work. As you notice, he's not really doing any like deep surgeries. Whereas I've worked with other people who you come up and they're sucking stuff out, blowing stuff on you, saying prayers, writing and scripting with his body. But ultimately, I think these people, it requires a deep relationship with the medicine to be able to take people in space. And then if we're trained, we can see things. I mean, Modesto, for example, my understanding is that he cleans everybody before ceremony and afterwards. But he's not really, I think, having that awareness of this is your work. And so I'm not going to just clean things up for you.
Mm.
Like in physical therapy, I was told that, or massage therapy or acupuncture, you never want to bring your patient to 100% whole. You want to get them to like 80 or 90% so that they can get to 100 and really integrate whatever process you've initiated. Because when we just have things done to us, oftentimes we just bust through and break it again. Whereas if we can be shown the way and then get to that 100%, it sits. So yeah, I mean, I think that the powers that we as human beings have is boundless. And when we are in alignment with spirit and with these plants, I mean, the healing that can occur is out of this world. And then in relation to the second part about mental illness, yeah, man, I totally agree with that. And I feel that you talk about intelligences, we consider average to be the norm and the only way. And if you're outside of that normal box, you are mentally ill or you have a disability. But really, I think it's different intelligences. And I'm familiar of several cultures you had mentioned where the person who is we would consider mentally ill, they're the ones who are it's like the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones who will come out and say something before events start to occur. Likewise, in other cultures, they are the ones who are doing that healing. I mean, in Western culture and Greek mythology, we've got the wounded healer archetype of the individual. And I think we all move through that process.
I'm one of those.
Chiron and Chiron, you've got a lot of
No,
Chiron energy,
no,
or
I
wounded
said,
healer.
yeah, I'm a wounded healer for sure.
Yeah, dude, me too. I mean, I think most are, if not all, because we have to move through our own process before we can support other people through it. And that's when the magic and the medicine, the power becomes so potent, because like we get it and we've walked that road and we can be a guide for others. And so, yeah, and I forget, it's not Mapacho is a tobacco. Marapuche, it's a Chilean indigenous people. And Gerardo, who we sat with, that's his lineage that he's studied a lot in. But he told this story once after a ceremony of it's largely women, I think, but every once in a while there's a woman who will behave differently, and they've got these different tests to put them through to understand, is this the person? And then this, like, what we would consider mentally ill individual becomes like the seer in the council for the tribe, for the community. And like the village chief or whatever will go and consult with this individual on issues because that person has a strong link or cord to spirit or to a different intelligence. In astrology, we talk about it like Piscean energy. And oftentimes, if you have a ton of Piscean energy without the energies to ground it, where we start to see more symptom mental illness. But again, like we consider it, I think that in the right context and the right containers, it's genius. So again, nothing's black and white, but I think that we can definitely redesign our systems to meet schizophrenia where it's at, to want to learn more about schizophrenia and what's coming through there, instead of just taking a pill to turn it off or to numb it. Because again, it's different types of intelligences, and I think every type of intelligence there's something to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I work in the mental health field, and most of my peers don't agree with a lot of the things, a lot of my views, because I've had these spiritual experiences. It's interesting.
Thank God you're in the mental health field.
Yeah, I mean, people like us who have challenging experiences, but a more open frame of reference, need others like us to go to talk to integrate with, to bounce these ideas off, to have community with. And I think that's so important. But you were talking about how how we go through our own challenges as a wounded healer, and then because we've overcome some of these things, we're better equipped to help others as a guide to help them navigate themselves. And we're not going in and like fixing other things in other people. We're just kind of pointing them in the direction of self-actualization, of self-discovery, and helping support them in
Totally.
their process. So
Yeah.
for you as a guide, and also being psychedelically informed is how I like to say it, because we've been in these
Hmm.
spaces.
Yeah.
But you're also a parent, right? And I'm interested in.
Nope.
Oh, you're not. I'm sorry.
No, no,
You're
not
looking to be.
not in this moment. I don't think so.
Right
I
on.
work a lot with kids.
Yeah.
I've got a history of environmental education, youth education, and building a program right now for adolescents' rites of passage. But I have no children of my own.
Nice. Well, this question applies to that as well, and I'm interested because I hope to have lots and lots of little Shanes running around. I want my
Yeah.
own like little jujitsu team. But
Hmm.
being psychedelically informed, I feel like we're in a pretty interesting space that we. It seems like we have a little bit more knowledge of ourselves, and we're able to help kids develop better than we did,
Hmm.
maybe by providing some form of education or discussion around consciousness and things like that. So, what do you think? Being, having gone through all the experiences you have, being psychedelically informed and shamanically informed, and all these things, how is that going to inform your work with the kids that you're working with right now, as well as like when you have your own kids, and how you're going to raise your kids and instill certain values in them?
Yeah. Um, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the phrase "know thyself," it applies to everything. Like if we can know ourselves, and again, I think knowing, defining that is understanding um, ourselves, also acknowledging that everything is changing. It just supports everything else we're doing in life. And I mean, the first thing that came to mind is being able to get on that level of being in a state of wonder and being in a state of, because kids naturally, there's no right and wrong. We all have values, certainly, but for kids, it's all gray area. And I think psychedelics really support us in remembering that it's all a gray area. Nothing is black and white. It'd be way too easy if that was the case. Uh, and so, yeah, being acknowledging the gray space and being able to get into that state of wonder, into that state of discovery, into that state of um, learning and messing up, and how to be gentle and compassionate with that process. There's been a lot of work around rites of passage. That process that we were talking about earlier, like that was a huge initiation for me. When I was a kid, I went to a wilderness therapy program as a student, and that was a huge initiation for me.
Which one did you
Um,
go to?
I went to Aspen Achievement Academy in Utah. It's since moved on, and I think part of some of the folks who were there went on to start Blue Sky or Open Sky in Durango. But that was a huge pivotal experience for me. I was getting in trouble at home and using substances, and um, you know, just I wasn't doing anything terribly, but I was doing almost everything not in a good way.
Hmm. Your relationship with
Like
these
drinking
things was not
alcohol to
healthy.
get
Yeah.
wasted. Yeah, exactly. Like selling weed for popularity, lying and being real. I had a lot of anger as a kid. My mom, my family. It wouldn't express itself in public, but holes in the walls at home and stuff like that. And going to wilderness therapy really helped me to take authority out of the picture and simply be in a space of natural consequences and be in relationship with myself, and acknowledge that I'm the one creating my reality. I didn't phrase it like this then, but like if I don't make a good tent with my tarp or a good backpack with my tarp and it falls apart, I can't yell at anybody but myself because I made it. Or if I didn't do something fast enough and we have to go through drills, like that's me. If I forgot something, we have to go walk back and turn a 6 mile day into a 18 mile day. I did that. And so that was huge, and bringing rites of passage into work with our adolescents, especially. I mean, I love it at adolescence, 28 to 32, Saturn return time, before entering into marriage, working with kids, and then entering into elderhood. I think those are all really important parts. But especially adolescence, so much of going from being a kid and becoming an adult happens unconsciously these days. There's no recognition of the youth shifting into this new chapter. And so mom and dad don't know how to quite operate with the kid. The kid doesn't know how to operate. Everybody wants space. We want to hold on. And I think so much of rites of passage is the ritual. This is part of the human process, but most importantly, making conscious that my child, or that I as a individual, am changing into something else. And so how do we consciously work with that? How do we have conversations about, when I taught, I ran a traveling boarding school residential program for a little while, and my favorite class to teach was sex, drugs, and rock. And like, nobody wants to talk about it, but how do we talk about it so we can talk about what right relationship is? So that you are taking huge risks that you don't want to talk about with anybody. Instead, we can talk about what's safe, what is helpful or harmful. How do we feel comfortable discussing these things? And how do you, because like, kids are inevitably going to just try a bunch of stuff. Whatever I say to them, nobody's ever told me something that I was like, okay, I totally believe that. Now I'm not going to try it. I have tried everything, and that's just, I get it. Like, that's how I am. But how do we have these conversations so that people try them in safe settings? How do we have conversations so that there's a container and a channel to discuss that? And so for me, your original question of how, shamanism and all this medicine work, and it's really just trying to be as conscious as possible, play into this. I think it's just being willing to be vulnerable and open up and say, you know what, I'm raising a kid, or I'm working with these kids, and I have no idea how to do this perfectly, but I'm going to try my hardest. I'm going to keep a conversation with the individual in that process, because I want to know how it's going for them. And like, is this working? Because they're in relationship with me. They're in relationship with me as mentor, or as father, or as whatever else it is. And so acknowledging the two-way street here, and then oftentimes, especially with our own children, like, dude, that is that's outside death. I think it's the biggest initiation that humans go through. And I think it's one of the biggest karmic playouts that we go through in this lifetime, is like, dude, clearly you're here to teach me something, and I'm here to teach you something. And so how do we engage in that way? So there's a big mouthful of things, but yeah, I think simply through opening up and through acknowledging that, like, there's no right or wrong. We're just doing the best we can. And like, let's always try and be in a good relationship with each other. And if we can have that as a base, it's going to play out fine.
Nice. Yeah. I think being psychedelically informed is going to help me have some of those important discussions with my kids or whatever, and help me be more honest with them right up front about what I've been shown is the true reality, that, connection is most important, love and understanding and these things. I think it's going to help me be a better parent, because I know myself better. Like you said, like knowing yourself. Yeah, I think that's huge, man. And yeah, I don't know. I can't wait until that day when I have a bunch of little Shanes running around and I get to.
Yeah, dude. I like your little team of jiu-jitsu. Oh God, then they're all going to be on the mat with you.
That's right. I hope so.
And like, one more thing is this process of projections and mirrors. I do think that there's a lot of practice that doesn't need to involve plant medicines or altered states even, but how to become more clear and more conscious of what's going on internally, so that we're not projecting that onto those we love. It's so easy, if I'm angry at myself, that I'm angry with my partner, or if I'm fearful of somebody freaking out during a ceremony, I should probably check with myself internally. because you're just a mirror, you're a blank slate for me to be projecting onto. And same thing goes with kids. How do we be in a state where we can be consciously aware so that we're engaging with them in a way that we want to, in a way that they deserve, which is seeing them for them, not ourselves.
Wow. Wow, that's going beyond seeing them as a reflection or a part of us. Because I think every parent sees themselves in their kids at times too. Um,
Certainly. And genetically, that's what's going
yeah,
on, karmically,
yeah.
even.
Yeah, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about rites of passage because I feel like that's something that's lacking a lot in our culture, specifically for, youth. Like you said, the only real delineation or marker that anyone's transitioning into adulthood is, being able to vote at 18, being able to join the military, being able to drink at 21, and now smoke cannabis at 21, and then being able to rent a car at 25.
Yeah.
And for me, like I always sought out my own rites of passage in various parts of my life because I knew for myself that by seeking out and facing challenges, I would
Mm-hmm.
grow the
Mm-hmm.
most. And so, rites
Mm-hmm.
of passage is super important to me. I mean, all my tattoos, I consider rites of passage. Being able to
Mm-hmm.
sit through the pain and work on my own mind and how it's dealing with
Mm-hmm.
pain as it's happening. That is a rite of passage. And everything from marriage. I got married last September. That was a rite of
Mm-hmm.
passage. Like,
Totally.
I'm starting a PhD in the fall. That's going to be a rite of passage for me in my
Mm-hmm.
educational career. So I seek these things
Mm-hmm.
out. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
look around at the landscape and I don't see a lot of people, like, either they don't know that rite of passage might be necessary in their journey, or they don't know where to start. They don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
engage the rite of passage. And I always go back to Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey when
Yeah.
I think of rite of passage. But
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear more about how you put that together in your mind and how important that is.
Yeah. I mean, for me, rite of passage is it's acknowledging an internal, it's externally acknowledging an internal process. Um, and so, we talk about projections again. This is super Jungian. Um, and it's that we have a bunch of content going on inside. We have these internal processes, and that whatever we're not able to or willing to consciously look at internally, we project externally.
Mm.
And hopefully, we have the awareness to recognize that and then take it back inside and make that content conscious. I think ritual when I'm working with people. People are like, oh, I want to work with my ancestors more. It's like, okay, great. Well, how do we externalize that process? You can make an altar, you can have a photo,
Mm.
light a candle, these types of things, but it supports having a container for specific content, whether psychic, emotional, whatever, um, so that we can more consciously engage with it. And I think rites of passage is just that. It's like, okay, I'm 12 years old. I'm becoming more, developmentally. This is what's happening in the brain, but I'm becoming more uh, interested in myself as an individual and having my own space. And if that's not externally vocalized or recognized, then you've got child trying to create more space. Mom and dad are like, wait, you're still our baby, and you have conflict. Um, Whereas if we could go through some sort of ritual that engages the senses and makes it much more um, full to recognize, okay, my baby will always be my baby in some capacity, and he or she is becoming on their way to becoming an adult. And so I need to do things to give them that kind of space. Um, Back in the days of old, and still when we engage rites of passage, it's about being recognized by your community. You'd be taken, or you'd by choice go off. You'd leave your tribe of people, and part of you would die, and you'd come back a new individual, whether that's moving from childhood into adulthood, or single into a family life, or whatever else. But when you come back, you're seen differently. You're seen differently by the community because they acknowledge the ritual that you just moved through, the initiation you just moved through. Um, and you're probably seen differently because you went through some stuff out there, and you are forever changed. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've always thought that we need to bring back vision quests and bring back
Totally.
walkabouts because just like you're describing, like you go up in the mountains on your own. I think it was even depicted in the movie 300 with Spartan
Uh-huh.
culture. Like they send this
Uh-huh.
kid off and you have to go survive on your own. And if you make it back alive, then the whole community sees you as an adult
Yeah,
now.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And it's there's pride in that. There's affirmation in that. There's um everything changes after that. And in my experience, it's much easier to go through experiences consciously than unconsciously. And it's like, would you rather be doing jujitsu with the lights on or with lights off?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it may be. I don't know.
I tell you what, man, the better I've been doing jujitsu now for 13 years, and the more time you get in and the more skill you get, you actually rely on your visual sense a lot less. So it's a grappling art. So we're wrestling on the ground, and it becomes a lot more somatic. So
Hmm.
now I will, I'm a higher ranking belt. So when I'm rolling with the white belts or even blue belts, sometimes I'll close my eyes
Hmm.
and grapple with them like that. So I'm only relying on my physical sense of touch and
Hmm.
feeling their balance and feeling my balance. And sometimes it enhances my ability to navigate this physical puzzle that I'm trying to unlock.
Hmm.
Because sometimes the visual sense gets in the way. So at this point,
Touche.
man, yeah, at this point, I don't know. I would prefer. It doesn't really matter. I like to grapple in the dark too.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
yeah.
see
Well,
I see your
maybe
point.
maybe
Yeah.
taking away all the senses or something of that sort. But
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, I think uh, yeah, to me, rites of passage is something that it's a lost art. And again, like when we're between the age of like 28 and 30 and really coming into ourselves as adults, how do we recognize that and honor that things are going to be different? Um,
So I have a question for you because you're
yeah,
about to embark on quite a journey.
yeah, man.
In my mind, as an outsider's perspective, I'm so happy for you. It's going to be a huge blessing, and I can't wait to have you back on the podcast to talk about it when you get done with it. But this is really going to be like a rite of passage
Yeah.
experience for you, where you're going to be traveling around. I'm wondering if you could tell myself and the audience what's in store, what's right around the bend, and what you're anticipating it's going to be like.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was having dinner last night with a gentleman named David Sobel. He's kind of the place-based education uh, guru in the United States, and he was here doing some work with environmental educators through a program that I run. And he was asking the same thing. He's like, "Well, what's the most recent rites of passage you've been through?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm in it." Like, I'm leaving I left my long-term partner last summer, and and I'm leaving my job on the summer solstice. I'm leaving my home, and I'm moving into a uh, super small. It's basically an Astro van converted into an RV. It's like a micro RV, and that's going to enable me to have the freedom to go and study with these people more long term, and to have the wings to just flow and fly to where I'm feeling called and really engage a lot of these skills that I've been building, whether it's doing death doula or altered states work or astrology, um, or simply coaching. But uh, yeah, short answer is I don't know. There's a chance that Modesto from the Costa Rican people in Mexico is going to come up in July and maybe do a tour with him. And I know, actually, I know one thing, and that's that in August, I'm going to California to go officiate a wedding for some dear friends. Then from there, I think I'll head south, and then the feeling is to end up in Guatemala with Larissa, my girlfriend, and she's got family down there, and we're into learning about similar things. So be living down there with her, and be closer to some of these teachers in Brazil and Mexico, and um, just dive like head first into all this stuff that I love. Maybe continue my master's program through Adams State University. It's online, so I can keep jamming through that. But yeah, I mean, it's been crazy. That ceremony that we sat in, the lesson was let go. And now I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
I've let go of everything. Like, now what? And I'm just listening. I'm trying really hard to listen. And I trust it's all going to work out beautifully. My experience is that, when we let go of things, especially when we're kind of prompted to do so, that something beautiful is going to fill in. And that's not to say that it's more beautiful than what we had. It's just as we move through our life, things change, visions change, dreams change, and so everything else changes with that. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. I think I'll be leading a workshop at Beloved Festival in August in Oregon, called Dying to Live. And that's working through a lot of this death doula type stuff I've been doing, and how do we use that as a mirror. And then I'm so pumped to marry my friends, and we just designed the ceremony for that. And I'm really curious where it's going to go, because I don't know. I have a strong idea that I'll be going down to see Banky of the Ashaninka people, to go be on dieta, plant dieta with him for October. But again, like, I'm just trying not to get too fixated on what the future holds, and just be really open and flow with it. But my intention is to be a full-time student, to be studying all of these different things I love, and then to be working with people really in depth, in helping them to self-actualize and achieve their dreams in life.
Nice. So do you have intention to return back to the US and start again here after this journey happens, or are you leaving that part open to the universe as well?
I'm leaving it all open. I don't want to, I've got a lot of experience with the golden bird cage. Is that what the saying is? But like the golden prison cell of like my vision and all these awesome things I've created, like, it's so beautiful, but if I'm not willing to let go of it when the time comes, then it becomes my prison. So I'm trying to, only build 3 walls and have 1 wall really open. I have a house here in Boulder. That's an incredible conversation about fate and kindness. But I've got a home here in Boulder that I'll actually be relying on a bit financially through Airbnb. I'm praying that money coming in this summer to be able to live off that modestly for a couple months, and then rent it out to friends in the school year. So I want to come back. If I definitely don't feel like I'm leaving forever. I mean, ultimately, my vision is to have some sort of retreat center and be operating that, and be calling in people like you and Modesto and all these people from all these different areas of study and modalities of healing. And how do we create a center for conscious evolution of self, and a place to center and get back into the body, and leave feeling refreshed and having next steps, and then also be able to stay in contact with the center for integration purposes, for guiding purposes. Because so many times, you have these big experiences and you're like thrown back in the world, and you're like, whoa. So like, I feel like my specialty, what I really love, is the preparation and the integration side, and then rely on these masters to really be working that core process, but that I understand that well enough to help people in and really help people out.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I love Colorado, and I'm feeling the call to be somewhere a little warmer and a little bit more humid. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, man. Well, I hope you come back, especially now with the decriminalized Denver thing going through. And who knows,
Yeah.
by the time you get back, like there may be even bigger shifts. You may come back to a whole new climate in the U.S. around psychedelic medicines, and it could be amazing. So,
Dude, totally.
if people want to reach out to you or get in touch with you, I know you mentioned that you're putting together a website and it hasn't launched yet, but if you could go over like what that website is, and I think even explain the name a little bit, and how people can get a hold of you.
Yeah, totally. So about a year ago, I was at a Trevor Hall concert with a friend, and Trevor was telling the stories of, or the story of these sadhus in India, these holy people, or rather people who study spirit, and they come to a village and they're considered mad because they're just so in love with living. And I love the idea of, losing the mind and occupying the heart. And so after that, a friend started calling me the madman of the heart, because I love strong, and I love the story behind it of being that person that brings spirit everywhere I go, and that helps people tap into that ecstasy, that love that is available and within us at all times. And so the brand Madman of the Heart is what I am adopting, and there's been some reluctance there because of the association with the term mad, but you know what, I'm going to try it on and see how it fits. So madmanoftheheart.com is the website that I'm building, and then people can email me at bradsmith647@gmail.com. Maybe I'll find a new email address as well that incorporates that madman part. But yeah, I mean, my intention is really to be on the move and to be bringing spirit everywhere I go, and to help people connect really with themselves. That's what I'm all about, is how do we begin to let go of the illusion, the patterning that we've grown up with, and tune into what do I want? How do I manifest that in my life? How do I actualize on that, and turn it into something tangible? Because man, like, freedom is just the sweetest thing. And we can't approach freedom until we realize that we're not free. Just like we can't begin to open our hearts until we realize that they're closed. And like, we live with closed hearts all the time, and so the first step is just admitting and being humble with ourselves that, like, I want more. And how do I begin to in a graceful and compassionate way seek what we feel there is waiting for us?
Wow. Brad, I want to say thank you again for spending the time to have this conversation with me. It's been an honor and a pleasure to really get to know you and get to know what's going on inside your own conversation in your mind.
Yeah.
And I really hope to have more conversations like this with you in the future when you return. And by all means, I'm always in for retreat center work. That's like my dream job. Let me finish this PhD first, and then we're all good to go. But I want to let all of our listeners know out there that this conversation was also done in video, so it's going to be up on YouTube too. So please continue to like and share. Please donate to the podcast if you find any of this content useful. We don't take any advertising funds, and I don't take any personal funds from this. It all goes back into the podcast to try and make the message clearer and better for all of you. That's really our goal. So, Brad, again, thank you for coming on the show. We'll have you on again soon. Many blessings.
Yeah, Shane, dude, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation. And, it's been great just to drop in with you a little deeper. And it'd be so much fun to do one of these while I'm on the road in the van. I'm excited to see what ends up happening. And I'm really grateful for the great work that you're doing, really, as somebody who's just beginning to climb the academic mountain, and having my own doubts around a master's or PhD program. It's been awesome to have you as a resource to witness what you're doing, and really the doors that can open. And it's through working with a ceremony, but it's like, how do we get everybody in all these different fields and all these different lineages and types of learning and certifications and whatnot to all be working towards the same goal? And like, that's what we're doing. And it seems like that's a lot of what these conversations help facilitate and cultivate. So dude, thank you. And I still look forward to staying in touch. And I'm so excited to learn where all this goes.
Nice, man. And I would love to have you on the show while you're on the road. So if you find stay in contact. If you find a good spot with good internet service, we can do this again. And for all you listeners out there, check out the MindOps website, mind-ops.com. Please like and share the podcast with your friends and family. Help bring others into this conversation and help us to shift consciousness in a positive forward direction. Reach out to Brad if you have any questions or comments. And last but not least, if anything, if you can take anything from this podcast, lose your mind just a little bit and learn to live through your heart. And that's okay.
Indeed.
All right.
Yeah. And may peace be with all the people listening to this, and you too, Shane.
All right. Love you, Brad.
Yeah. Love you too, brother. Bye.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.